Welcome to Redeeming Missions, an every home podcast where we explore the heart of what it means to carry Christ to our world. I'm Tanner Peake, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today. Welcome to another episode of Redeeming Missions. I'm excited. I have one of my favorite people in the world sitting next to me. If you're watching this on video, you're going to see we're wearing some beautiful shirts.
Yeah.
What are they called again, Manasa?
In Fijian, it's called kalavata. Literally translated, simply means same color.
Yeah, we're looking really good. I'm pretty much from the Pacific Islands now because I'm wearing this shirt. But I'm happy to have Manasa Kolivuso with me. He already said it. He's coming from Fiji. And he's a dear friend. He's a leader within Every Home for Christ. He's one of those people. He's a spiritual father, actually, within the ministry. He's been here as long as I've been here, and he's always been somebody I've looked up to. So, Manasa, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me this morning.
Thanks for having me, Tanner.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure.
So we're going to start as we always do. I'm just going to ask you to tell a little bit of your story, how you became who you are today, and just whatever comes to your mind this morning. Just it's kind of free flowing. Whatever you think.
Well, thank you, Tanner. First of all, once again, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Well, my name, of course, you've introduced me. I was born 8th of June, 1963. So I guess people can calculate how old I am right now. I'm 61.
You look good. I mean, I'm aging considerably worse than Manasa.
I'm 61 years old. I was born maybe in what is considered in a Fijian context and perhaps in the Pacific Island context in a Christian family. The reason being is that we go to church every Sunday. You ask any Fijian for that matter, they would say, I'm a Christian. My father and mother got married in 1962. I was born 1963. But when my mother was pregnant, carrying me, after 4 months of pregnancy, this is the story I heard later. My father left. They didn't fight. He just left to go and play football in another island, another town. And he was representing the island, my mother's island. And when he went, he never came back home.
Wow.
And then, of course, 9 months later, I was born and never met nor ever saw my father.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yes, until I was in grade 9.
Wow.
He only saw, pictures of me. I saw pictures of him. But my mother, traditionally in our culture, when the firstborn comes to the world, it's named after somebody from the father's side, out of respect. So I'm named after my father's father, my paternal grandfather. Now, so you can imagine my mother carrying this hurt of being left alone, kind of abandoned by my father. I didn't know this story until I was old enough. Then my mother told me the story. So I grew up in a single family by my mother. My mother, of course, she really loved me. I was like her pet, was a spoiled child growing up.
Did you have siblings?
At that time, no, not yet.
Nice. So you were the oldest?
I was the oldest,
yeah.
Until she remarried. And she remarried when I was about 6 years old. I was in grade 1 at that time. And then I had 2 other siblings from my from her husband. And I grew up, growing up in a family like that, it wasn't easy. Yeah, but I did very well at school. And I enjoyed going to school. And I don't know, now when I look back, I really don't understand why I enjoyed going to school, even from day one. Day one, naturally, kids cry up, when they go to school, when their mother leaves them to go back. I kind of enjoyed school. I did very well at school. I would rather, either come first or second in class, or hardly come third, first, second. So, and then we left my mother's island to go to my stepfather's island. And that's where life was really tough for me. Growing up in a family where you have 2 other siblings and you can feel the tension and all those kind of things. But fortunately, it didn't affect my academic life, my education. I did very well. until I went to high school and I passed what was then known as university entrance. And in those days, our exam papers were set in New Zealand, not Fiji. So I passed. And for somebody to pass like that kind of exam at grade 12, that's like the talk of the country. Talk of the country. It was like, you've really passed a big exam. And I was the first, actually, from my school that actually passed that exam and went to university. And I was the first as well from my village to get a degree from the university. And that was like a big, big achievement for a village boy. And that's when I was introduced to urban life. I was always like a boy from a rural area. But then I went to what is our capital, Suva. And I lived most of my life right there in Suva. And then I became a school teacher. But while I was still at university, and that was in 1984, that's when I came to know Christ. I came to know Christ through Campus Crusade.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes. 1984 was the same year EHC started in Fiji. And I knew that. I knew how EHC started in Fiji. I didn't know much about Every Home for Christ then. But I came to Christ through Campus Crusade, through those 4 spiritual laws.
Wow.
Yeah, somebody presented that to me. I came to Christ. And I remember when we were having this conversation, he asked me this question, are you a Christian? And I was offended by that question. Because I always knew, I thought, I grew up in a Christian family. Of course, I'm a Christian. I go to church. I love Sunday school. I pray. I read the Bible. And when he asked me that question, are you Christian? I said, how come you asked that question? Because I'm a Fijian. Of course, I'm a Christian. Then he went on and said, well, what makes you a Christian? I said, well, I go to church. I grew up in a Christian family. I read the Bible. And then he said, well, all those things are great, but none of them makes you a Christian. And then he took me through this process, the 4 spiritual laws, and that's when I kind of received a revelation of what it means to become a Christian. And I remember I was like confronted with the gospel, the simple presentation of the gospel then, and I think out of respect for him, I gave my life to Christ. I prayed the sinner's prayer, but I wasn't really genuine in my faith. And not until, I think, a couple of months later, when I really had an encounter with Christ in my room. I was coming back from running, just a road run, and I came across this group of guys, and I know they were Christian. I always avoid them. And they were talking, and they were just sharing, and I was standing there listening, not knowing that everything that they were talking about was kind of hitting me. And I went to my room, and there was a warmth in my room that, something, it's hard to explain. And I thought just because I was coming back, from road run, that it was because I was sweating, but it was a different kind of warmth. And later on I found it was the presence of God. And I didn't know how. I just knelt beside my bed right there. And that's when I really surrendered my life to Christ. This was 1984, the University of the South Pacific. Early in the morning, and this group of guys usually have a prayer meeting 5 o'clock every morning. And that morning, they were surprised when they saw me coming. I mean, they knew me. I was this naughty guy.
I can't even imagine you as a naughty guy. Yeah. That's amazing.
So when I came in, I knew they were kind of suspicious. Is this guy really, is he real? Is he really genuine? And that was it. Never looked back then. Graduated with a diploma in education after spending 3 years at university. And I went and taught in one of the islands, the southernmost island in Fiji. That was 1985. So I entered university in 1982, 83, 84. 85 was my first year experience as a teacher. And I taught English, taught in a junior high school. And that was just from grade, we call it in Fiji forms 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is grade 7, 8, 9, and 10. And that's when I was in that school, that's when the early pioneer missionaries of Every Home for Christ came to that island. And because I had already heard about Every Home, I had become a Christian, and I was still like this first love for God, and I was still searching. I actually accommodated these guys in my home.
Explain what they were doing, because somebody might be listening to this and saying, what on earth is an every home
They,
pioneer mission?
they came with one vision, and that is to reach every home on that island with the gospel.
Wow.
Yes. And that came a couple of years later after I got married. Well, I got married, and when they came, they had nowhere to stay. I didn't know any of them. But I was kind of convicted in my spirit that I needed to do something for these guys. So the best I could do was, okay, why don't you come stay with us in our home? And they used our home as a base of operation. Right? And we were supporting them, we were feeding them, we were sheltering them. And from there, I got introduced to Every Home for Christ. And because I came to Christ through Campus Crusade, but I was actually discipled by Every Home for Christ.
Wow.
And every time I think about this, I take my hat off these guys. For me, being discipled by these guys, actually, for me, this is my concept of discipleship. When I look at what they did, it's not so much what they shared from the Word of God. Of course, that is important. It was their life. Because when they talk about prayer, early in the morning when I'm still sleeping, I'm hearing them praying. This is 3 o'clock in the morning, I think. And I thought about it. These guys are crazy. Why are they waking up early in the morning? And I'm hearing this guy, they're praying and they're praying. And when they talk about prayer, I don't have to believe what they're saying because of what they are talking about. I believed it because I heard it, I saw it.
You heard it early in the morning?
Yes, I heard it, I saw it. And when they talk about mission, I don't have to believe what they talk about because they actually do that every day. They go to a village, they are chased from that village. And the next day I asked them, where are you going? And they're going back to this village. And I said, man, you're crazy. You've just been chased from that village yesterday. And they said, no, our vision tells us we have to go. We have to find a way to get this gospel to every home. So this is how I was introduced to the ministry of every home. I was kind of sold out to the vision. So we supported them until they covered the whole island.
Wow.
Covered the whole island. They went back. And then later on, another group came for another visitation of the same island. They stayed with us. It wasn't easy, though, at that time, because there were a lot of oppositions. And because I was looking after them, I also encountered a lot of opposition. But it was to me, it was the best time of my Christian life.
Wow.
Why do I say that? Because, you are being opposed for for nothing wrong, because you do nothing wrong. And just because of the gospel, there are people who don't like you. Just because I was looking after these guys. So for me, I grew up in my Christian life through that. I went through the fire of adversity, if you will, growing up in that island as a Christian. And then I had no idea. My plan was, later on I went back to university, completed my degree. And then I was just planning to go to do law.
To do law? Wow.
I wanted to be a politician.
Wow.
And then after doing my degree, I went and taught in another school. And one night I slept and I saw, I don't know whether it's a vision, a dream, but I saw myself walking into the Every Home for Christ office. And the lady at the reception said, the director wants to see you. So I went into the director's room, and the question he asked me was this. This was a dream. What else you're waiting for? The time is now.
Wow.
Yeah, and then
that's a dream.
A dream.
I mean, that's a wild, directive dream.
Yeah. So, and then I woke up. And, it's just a dream. I never shared that dream with anybody. Exactly a week later, I saw the same dream.
Wow.
Same dream. And when I woke up this time, I was troubled in my spirit. I said, no, this is not just a dream. It cannot be, a week after another and 2 weeks in a row on the same night, the same Thursday night. I still remember it was Thursday. Never shared with anybody, but I hated it. I kind of knew, I understood what the dream meant, that God wanted me into full-time ministry. But I had my plans. I wanted to go and do law and enter politics. But one morning while we were having breakfast, Millie, my wife, she turned to me and she said, I have to tell you something. I said, yeah, go ahead. You are disobeying God. I still remember the way she said it.
Wow.
Vividly. You are disobeying God. And I asked her, why? How come? Disobeying God in what? Because I never shared the dream with her.
Wow.
And this is what she said. God is calling you into full-time ministry, but you don't want it. You hate it. And I said, wow, how did you know this? And she said, God showed it to me in a dream last night. I said, I still remember very well what I said. Don't you ever bring this up again. Because, I didn't like it. Because I didn't see myself going to full-time Christian ministry. Really, I didn't. So at the end of that year, the director of Every Home for Christ was the founding director of Every Home for Christ then. I was teaching in Ireland, in his province. So they came over for the New Year celebration to spend New Year in their village. And we happened to have the church service, New Year service. And I was the master of ceremony that evening. And then I introduced him to come and preach. At the end of the service, it's now New Year. And we were just having tea, and then he asked me, are you coming to Suva, the capital, where the office of Every Home is? I said, yeah, I'll be coming next week. Well, when you come, just hop in. Come into the office, we'll talk. I've forgotten the dream by that time. And then, I went. When I walked up the steps of the office, the dream was replayed before me. But this time it's no longer the dream. It was happening in reality. And when I thought about it, I stood. I paused for a while, and the thought that came to me, okay, I wish that the lady I saw in the dream sitting at the reception is a different lady. If it's a different lady, then okay, forget about the dream. Came in, it was the same lady I saw in the dream.
Wow.
The actual words she said in the dream was actual words the director is waiting for.
Wow.
Came into his office, sat down. Even before he said hello, the director said, what else are you waiting for? The time is now.
Oh, Manasa, I've never heard that story. Yeah. That's wild. If that's not confirmation, then, you would be very disobedient at that point.
The first confirmation was from my wife.
Right.
And this is
and even the fact that you had the dream twice. Yeah,
twice.
Yeah, even that is confirmation.
Yes, and this is the second confirmation. And when he asked me that question, what else are you waiting for? The time is now. I just shed tears. And then he paused for a while. He thought that he had said something that offended me. And then afterward, after I had composed myself, he asked what happened. And I told him the story. And that's when I knew it sank in, that God was calling me to full-time ministry. But then I told him, I think God is calling. And I believe God is calling me. It's been confirmed. But the time is not yet ready. I'm not ready for this yet.
Wow.
I'm glad I was honest.
Yeah.
I was honest. I wasn't ready yet. So by saying that, I thought God would change his mind.
It's like a delay tactic.
Yes, it's a delay tactic. That's the best way to put it. So I told him, please give me another year. And they said, okay, yes. I didn't know he had been praying. Wow. He had been praying for somebody. Well, cut the story short. I went back, taught for another year. And I remember, I think halfway into that year, the idea of going to do law had gone.
Wow.
And this passion for God and for God's work just came. And I knew this was it. I told my wife, called Millie, I said, I'm ready. But I asked her, are you ready for this? I know, do you know the cost we're going to pay for this? The price, there's a price for this. And she said, I was ready from the day God showed me that dream.
Wow.
Tended to be honest. I wasn't ready, but she was ready.
Right.
She was ready for this. Yeah, so at the end of the following year, I wrote my resignation letter. And by that time, in the high school I was teaching, there were 32 staff members. And I went to the principal's office, gave him a copy of the letter, of my resignation letter. He looked at me. And I remember him asking me this question, are you sure you're making the right decision? He thought I had gone crazy.
Right.
Because the truth of the matter is in Fiji, if you're a degree holder from the university, you're somebody people look up to. It's only people who cannot make it through the academic ladder that go to the Bible school and do God's work.
Right.
Yeah, so that was like the perspective, the way people perceive God's work. So I said, I'm ready for this. He gave me another envelope. I gave him a copy of my letter. He gave me another envelope, and I opened that envelope, and this was a letter from the Public Service Commission from the Fiji government offering me the position of vice principal of the school.
Oh, wow.
Imagine, now I have to make a choice.
Yeah, now you had all these confirmations, but now you're being tested.
Yes.
Wow.
I looked at that letter, and I looked at the principal, and I said, sir, I think you have to look for somebody else.
Wow.
He said, are you sure? Yeah. I've wrestled with God for 2 years, and I don't think I can win this wrestling match. Wow. I'm giving this up. And I still remember he asked me, and your future? And I said, my future is in God's hands.
Whew.
So that was 1996. So I left teaching in 1996. I came into full-time ministry with Everyone for Christ, 6th of January 1997.
Wow.
And since then, I'm still here.
That story, I don't think I've ever heard that story. I've known you for over 15 years. I have never really heard your whole story. Yeah. I want to ask you here in just a second another story that probably is kind of a continuation maybe of even your story. But I want to say first, I want to tell my own story of how our paths crossed at one particular time. And I think in a way that was really spiritual, or it was just the Lord. It was I don't know how many years ago. It had to be 8 years ago, 7 years ago. You and I met in Sydney. Australia. It was just me and you. We were there doing some ministry with another brother. And I just remember us having a lot of time to walk around, and we were walking around Sydney. And I remember one specific instance sitting down with you and you telling me this story, and I'm going to ask you to tell the story, but it's a story about faith, and it's a story, actually, it's an true Every Home for Christ story. And I remember you telling me this, and as a young leader, being so inspired. I mean, one of those stories that you hear and almost convicted. I mean, it's one of those stories that you think, man, this strikes me to the very core. And at the time, I was leading the international facet. I had just taken over the international facet of the ministry. And I returned home from Sydney after that with just this renewed passion to see the gospel, Jesus Christ, carried to all people in a really definitive way. And it would have been 6 months or a year after that, we launched a global initiative that I would say in a lot of ways, it was built around or was inspired by the story that I want you to share. And so I just want to actually just acknowledge how important, you've been in my journey, in this entire fellowship. Every Home for Christ is in 165 nations. And in all of those nations, we are trying to carry Christ to every person, to every home, whether that's on small islands or in valleys or high up in the mountains, the end of the road, sometimes an airplane ride away. And so you're just an inspirational, I hadn't heard your story. That's inspirational, but you're just an inspirational person within our fellowship. So would you be willing, though, to share that story that you shared with me all of those years back, sitting there drinking coffee in Sydney?
Yeah. When the ministry of Every Home for Christ began in Fiji, it wasn't easy. As I said, I came to Christ when I was in university in 1984. I knew exactly when EHC started, because the first T-shirt with the name Every Home Fiji written, I got one, a yellow one. I still remember it. I can't remember, Tanner, now who gave it to me. Now, I had no idea that one day I would come and serve God through Every Home.
This is before. Before. Yeah, you had decided to serve full time. Yeah.
Before. And when the ministry began, it wasn't easy. We faced a lot of opposition. There were a lot of young people, of course, who came, became part of the movement. It was
primarily young people,
young people's movement.
Yeah.
And young people, Yes, young people, they have the passion, the enthusiasm, they have all these things, but you need to guide them along, So the slogan then for us in those days, and for the young people who came, who we call the pioneer missionaries, the pioneers of the movement in Fiji of Every Home for Christ, was live by faith or die. Live by faith or die. They actually had to make a covenant, these young men and women, that they would never enter into a relationship for 5 years.
Which is a big deal when you're a young man.
Of course.
Was it young men and young women?
Young
or just
men
young men
and women.
Wow.
Young men and women, they made a covenant that for 5 years, because we reckon then that it would take about 5 years to cover the nation, to reach every home in Fiji. I mean, think about Fiji with 300 islands, 100 plus islands inhabited. So we reckon it would take that long to reach the nation for the first time. So our young people entered into a covenant that they would never get into a relationship for 5 years. And then at that time, because finance was, was limited, we faced a lot of financial constraints. Of course, there was support coming. So that's what our pioneer missionaries were taught. You live by faith or die. So when they're given the mission to reach an island, they would be given just one-way fare.
Wow.
Whether they go by boat or if they happen to fly in an airplane, if there's an airstrip there.
How many? Explain for a second, though. There's a lot of islands in Fiji.
300 islands altogether in Fiji, but about 110 that are inhabited. So we have to reach.
Crazy.
We have to reach 110 islands.
Wow.
So we thought it would take 5 years. So it would need some kind of commitment. Right? So that was one of the commitments that our early pioneer missionaries did. And not only that, because this was like a young people's movement. And then the other thing was, we have to trust God, whatever the cost.
Radical trust.
Yes. So they would be given one-way fare. Either you go by bus or you go by boat or by plane, and then you are told, this is the amount of time you're given to reach every home on that island or that particular district. You have to be back to base at this time. And you have to trust God for your airfares or your boat fare. Or
your return fare, right?
Your return fare.
That's crazy. That's just so wild.
So it was like a faith-building exercise. It wasn't just a faith-building exercise. I think it was a character-building exercise.
That's right. Yeah.
It really builds character for people to try. And God, of course, provided in ways that were beyond our imagination, the imagination of our workers then. And that kind of confirmed to them as well that God was with them. And most of these people were just people in the villages, when our early pioneer missionaries who came in, they were recruited in the field, they joined, and they saw how God provided on the way, when there is no food, and food suddenly comes. And when there is no return fare, either boat fare or airfares or bus fare, and they would see how God provides supernaturally. And that kind of confirmed to them, God is in this. I'm in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. So it went on until we covered the whole nation. It took us 5 years.
Wow.
It took us 5 years to actually take the gospel home to home, as we used to call it in every home, methodically and systematically.
That's right. To 110
inhabited islands. Island by island, home by home.
Have you ever considered what you would do if your family rejected you for having a Bible? Or the idea that getting baptized might land you in jail? What would you do if it was illegal to tell your friends about Jesus? In many regions of the world, legal restrictions against outreach and Christian worship have intensified, and believers faced increased violence and persecution. Every Home supports and equips courageous believers in 30 restricted nations where it is dangerous to share the gospel. You can come alongside these believers through your prayers and gifts. Learn more at everyhome.org/give.
When you say inhabited islands, 110 inhabited islands, are these like 1 million people per island? Are they big? I mean, is it small populations?
Fiji's population is not even reached 1 million.
No way, I didn't know that. Okay, so for sure, not millions of people on 110 islands.
No, we're only about 980,000.
Wow.
As of now. And of course, but way back in 1984 when the ministry started, it was less than that. Yeah. So, but the fact that these islands are scattered, and sometimes the boat service to some of the islands would be very irregular. So, I always talk about that in the Pacific. Our vision is to reach everybody, everywhere. So even if there's just one person living on one island, that soul matters to God. You have to reach.
This is so beautiful.
You have to reach that person. And you can get to that island if there's only one person or one family. But then you have to wait one whole month to get back.
Yeah, because the boats or the airplanes are only running so often.
Yes.
It's wild.
So, that's just the nature of ministry in what we call maritime areas like us and in most of the Pacific Island countries. So that's the way it happened in Fiji. That's where we came up with the idea of live by faith or die.
What a beautiful...
It was a faith. And for me personally, when I left, I told my story when I left teaching, where you get a regular income after 2 weeks. It was a faith exercise. I remember when I received my offer letter.
Wow.
From our director there. I looked at the salary and my eyes I asked myself, am I in the right place, But it was faith all along that brought me from the beginning of entering the ministry until today. And I thank God for that. I thank God for that. And, as I was well educated. I mean, comparatively.
Yeah,
when you compare me with other people in Fiji. And that was like, I'm the pride of the village, being the first. And I was the first to get a degree from the university. But I thank God when I came to full-time ministry, it killed my pride. Because I had to trust God daily. I mean, the salary I was given was not enough. But I saw how God provided all the way. Until today, Tiana, I hated, in my story, I didn't want to come to full-time ministry. I wanted to be a lawyer. But now as I look back, I don't regret at all the fact that God has trained me. I taught for 12 years altogether, but I believe those 12 years of teaching was just preparation. God was just preparing me for what I'm doing right now, which I love so much. And I don't think I'll go back into any kind of secular job because this is where God has called me. This is where I am. This is where I belong. And one of the things I love about our vision, it's so clear. It's just so clear. Just take the gospel to everyone, everywhere, and everyone lives somewhere.
That's right.
Everyone lives somewhere, whether it's a building,
right,
a house, and when a person gets in, it becomes a home, or it's a cave, or whatever. Everybody lives somewhere, right? So I interviewed an old man in Fiji. What does every home mean to you? And he said, the gospel at my doorstep.
The gospel at my doorstep. That's beautiful.
The gospel at my doorstep. And I said, please, can you tell me more about that? And he said, I was sick at the point of death when this young man came in. And they presented this simple gospel message. I came to Christ. They prayed for me, and I was instantly healed. And his whole family came to know the Lord. And they're serving God faithfully until today. That old man has since gone, be with the Lord. But I still remember what he said, the gospel at my doorstep.
Oof. One of the things that you said that just sticks out to me with your story, the live by faith or die story, is really the value of every soul. I like what you said. If there's just one person on an island, we're going to go to that place and the gospel on their doorstep. And that's just culturally who the Every Home for Christ tribe is. I mean, we're the type of people who go to the island if there's one person. Maybe you could say something more about how today, what it looks like to not leave a soul behind in Fiji. Because I know it's different. I know that it's evolved and the ministry's grown and it's expanded. Maybe you could say something about that.
I mean, I think we just need to go back to Jesus' ministry. He preaches to multitudes, thousands of people, but he never forgets a single soul. He ministered to that Samaritan lady, just one soul, at that well in Sychar in Samaria, hostile territory. And that one lady, just one lady went to her whole community and told everybody in her community.
That's right.
Please come meet somebody who has told me everything about me. Nothing hidden. Jesus just ministered to multitude on this side of the lake, and he said, let's go to the other side. And he went and delivered this demonic possessed man, who went then to the Decapolis, 10 cities. So Jesus ministered to multitude, thousands of people, but he never forgets a single soul as well.
Right.
And I think in context of our ministry, that is important as well. Mm-hmm. And that was hammered right into our hearts, into our early pioneer missionaries. Every soul matters to God, which means that every person must be given an opportunity to hear the gospel or be presented with a simple gospel presentation. Whether they come to give their life to the Lord or they become Christians or not, that's entirely their choice. But our responsibility is to make sure that we take this gospel to every home, in every community, every island. And if there's just one home on top of the mountain, you have to climb that mountain and present the gospel to that person. In a place like Papua New Guinea, Tana, where you literally have to climb mountains, cross rivers. And these homes are scattered all throughout. Some of the most remotest places on earth. Just recently, our workers covered one whole province. And there's a story about them crossing one river many, many times just to reach a home on the mountain. It takes sacrifice to do that.
And it's dangerous.
It is dangerous.
I mean, it's very dangerous. A lot of times, every home for Christ around the world is, like you said, is crossing rivers that are...
And sometimes crocodile-infested rivers.
Oh, see, I don't know if I have enough faith
and these
for
are
that.
some of these rivers in Papua New Guinea are fast-flowing rivers. And because it rains a lot in the forest, in the interior, sometimes it can be flooded rivers as well. So it takes a huge risk. But yes, the fact that we have this vision, taking the gospel to everyone, comes, of course, with risk. But it's worth the sacrifice.
That's right.
It's worth the sacrifice because we know that we're doing something that is right in the very center of God's will.
Right.
It is something that God, I mean, if there's anything in God's heart that matters more than anything else, of course, it's us.
That's right.
It's us. The only thing that makes heaven rejoice is when sinner repents of a sin.
That's right.
It's just one.
You're right. It's the only reference to making heaven rejoice.
That's it.
Is people turning to Jesus.
It's not because I build a big church building. Nothing wrong about that.
Yeah.
Or everybody knows me. I'm a good preacher, a good teacher. Nothing wrong about that. But the only thing that really excites heaven and makes heaven rejoice, makes God rejoice, is when one sinner repents of their sin. And to be given that privilege, I see my role, my work, my ministry every home as a privilege. Just a privilege to know that this perfect God can still use an imperfect being like me.
Right.
I mean, think about that. Has God ever used a perfect human being in history? Never. Even in our own imperfections, this perfect God can still trust us with the gospel. To me, this is the greatest honor. I feel a bit emotional here, but this is the greatest honor of my life. That this perfect God can still entrust me with this perfect gospel. And the only thing that can transform a human life. The only thing that can bring somebody from sin, from the slave market of sin, to belong to the kingdom of God, the family of God. And if that is the case, what's stopping us from reaching that last home on the last island, however remote that island is? Whether you go there by regular shipping services or go there on a fishing boat, you have to find a way to get there. And that's what it means to live by faith or die. Your faith should take you to the last island, the last home, on the last mountain.
That's right.
If that's what it takes to cross one river, like in Fiji, our workers crossed one river 22 times.
Wow.
Just on their way to that village, and 22 times on their way back.
Wow.
If that's what it takes, no change of clothes. So their clothes got wet, got dry, got wet again before they reach their base. That's what it takes. And it's worth the sacrifice when you know this life on earth will come to an end. But what comes next is what matters more than anything else.
What a way to live life.
Yes.
I mean, I love what you're saying, like imperfect, the way that God entrusts imperfect people with his perfect gospel. And I'm thinking of people listening to this, whether they're young or old, that may be disillusioned or just distracted.
Yeah.
And maybe have forgotten about how beautiful the good news really is.
Yeah.
And I think your story is so inspiring, because it just, when we have to sacrifice something to carry the gospel, there's something even in our own hearts that there's an edification that happens to us.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, our faith is built.
Yes.
Every time you cross that river,
Yes.
every time you cross into someone's home, or you
Yes.
knock on their door, or you love your neighbor, even in
Yes.
the U.S. or around the world, there's something of the gospel re-impacting us.
Yes.
In a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And so your story is just so inspiring.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, because as I said, sometimes you ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I have to cross this river? Why do I have to climb this mountain? I mean, it's just one person. What happens if it takes me 3 hours to climb this mountain, this person rejects me? These are the kind of things that come to your mind.
Yeah,
and
wait,
it happens.
what happens if I'm kicked out? I
I'm
mean, what
kicked
happens
out.
if they're just...
It happens. And those things happen. But why do we do what we do? Because that's what matters to God. And if that's what matters to God, it has to be something that we
Matters to
count.
us.
It matters to us as well. Because the only thing that has eternal value is a human soul.
That's right.
I mean, everything else we do in life, good as they are, they will come to an end. We'll never take anything to heaven with us. We came naked, we go back naked. The only thing that is more important to God is the human soul. And that's why we do that. Because I will be guilty if I know there is one family or just one soul living on top of the mountain or on that island, and I don't reach that island or reach that mountain. I'll be guilty because I was given the opportunity and I had the means to be able to go there. But I didn't go just because maybe I thought, it's just one person. But that one person matters to God. And sometimes, we should never underestimate the value of one soul and what God can do with one soul, like he did with the Samaritan lady, like he did with that man who was possessed by so many demons. How God just transformed one life. And through one life, entire communities came to know the Lord. I mean, I'm just one soul that came to know the Lord, discipled through every home for Christ. Now I'm involved with ministry of every home for Christ. I've preached the gospel to so many. Just imagine just one person touched by God and the influence that God can make through that one person. And it's amazing. It's worth it all. And in that way, it's worth the sacrifice as well. It's worth the sacrifice when you consider the fact that eternity matters.
That's right. Oh, of course. Yeah. Of course, nothing really matters more than eternity.
Yes,
Yeah.
eternity matters. So when we think of it that way, and that's what we try and tell our workers everywhere we go, this is why we do what we do. We cannot change a human life, only God can. But we do have the tools in our hands that can bring the impact, the transformation in human life, the gospel. And only the gospel, the word of God, can change the person's heart. And all we have to do is share the gospel. Whether the person comes to know, whether they accept or reject, that's entirely their choice. Right? So we have come to know Christ, we have to make him known.
That's right.
That's our responsibility. So I think that's what makes our work so interesting, so important, and because it has eternal value.
So
That's
good.
what keeps us going.
That's right. That's so good. Let me ask you a question that we ask on every one of these podcasts. And the question is what does carrying Christ mean to you personally? I mean, I feel like that's the conversation we've been having this entire podcast, this last 45 minutes. But what does it mean to you personally to carry Christ?
Well, if Christ is the one that has changed my life, I was a naughty boy.
Right.
At the university, I was living in sin, and I was confronted with the gospel, a simple presentation of the gospel. And the gospel is the word of God, and the word of God is Christ himself.
Right.
It is Christ,
Yeah,
the word.
well said.
In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. So if Christ the Word has impacted my life, influenced me, transformed me to the person that I am, the greatest thing, and there's nothing else that is greater than that, is to go and share with others the same Christ that has transformed, changed my life. That to me is what it means to carry Christ to the world. And carrying Christ to the world is not just talking about Christ, but living the Christ-like life. Sometimes, there are people who may not be so good in communicating the gospel verbally, right? But it's just the life you live, the life of Christ in you, that actually radiates to the other people. Sometimes the most powerful sermon that a person can ever preach is the silent sermon they live.
That's beautiful. It's so well said, Manasa. I think that's so true. I think sometimes we make it so mystical or so unachievable.
Yes.
But everyone's a preacher. I mean,
right.
what you just said is that everyone's a preacher.
Everyone is a preacher. As long as you have Christ in your life, you may not be able to communicate Christ in a verbal way. You may see yourself, feel inadequate, inexperienced in terms of verbally communicating the gospel, but let your life shine.
So good.
Christ in you, the hope of glory. And that's what people are looking for. And they can see it in you, in your life, the way you live your life. As I've said, and I've said this to people, sometimes the most powerful sermons you can ever live is the silent sermon. The most powerful sermon you can ever preach is the silent sermon that you live. And I remember a Hindu couple when I was still teaching. They were going to celebrate their daughter's first birthday. So they invited us, teachers. They were teachers as well. And they invited me to be the master of ceremony for their daughter's first birthday celebration. And I asked, what about your daughter's uncles and someone else can do it? And they said, no, we want you to do it. And I said, why? And I still remember what they said. Because we know you're a good Christian. You are a good Christian because you show it. So sometimes we don't realize how much our life can mean to others. You never know who's watching you.
That's right. That's so good.
You never know who's watching you. Because you can be so Christ-like when you're in church, but outside you're a different person altogether.
That's so good.
When Jesus said to Peter, you are Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. He said, I'll build my church. What is the church? The church is the word ecclesia from Greek, which means the called out ones. Sometimes we think, we put it this way, let's go to church, thinking that church is a location, a place, a building, not realizing we are the church. So wherever we are, there the church is.
So good.
So if I'm in the marketplace, the church is there. Christ is there. That's what it means to carry Christ.
That's right.
Wherever you are, that's where Christ is. And let the Christ in you shine wherever you are. Through your life, through what you say, your conduct, your faith. Just as Paul said to Timothy, let no one despise you because you're young, but be an example.
So good.
In life, in faith, in purity. So I think that's the way we carry Christ. We don't only carry Christ through what we say verbally, but I think our life must reflect that Christ-likeness.
That's right.
Yes.
Manasa, your answer is just so beautiful. And I guess what I'd want to say to our listeners is that, we tell stories on this podcast all the time. It's what we do. It's just the kind of approach that we've taken to this entire podcast. And I think it's really good just to hear the stories, but I hope that you walk away inspired, not just that this is Manasa's story or Fiji's story, but that live by faith or die is something that could be applying to you today, wherever you're at. It could be applied to me. I'm feeling provoked and even a little bit convicted. And so I hope that what you're hearing on Redeeming Missions podcast is something that inspires you into action. So you might be living in suburbia in the United States, or you might be living overseas somewhere. I hope this idea of live by faith or die can be applied to you in your context. And so I want to thank our audience for listening. I want to thank Manasa for sharing your story. and tune in to the next episode of Redeeming Missions. Thanks for joining us today. What's up, my brother?
What's up, dude? Bro, there's only one thing that matters after this podcast, and I hope you can put it in the show notes.
It's my shirt. I'm joking.
No, literally, that's what I was gonna say. Is
good,
like
nice.
where do we
Nailed
get
it.
like where do we get one of these? I'm fully jealous, dude. Manasa, like
So good.
he's a legend.
He is a legend.
I mean, obviously because of just the heart he carries and
Yeah.
those stories.
I was just feeling a little bit just unusual for me on that podcast, that I wanted to close the gap between these stories that we hear around the world and the person who might be listening to this in the US. I was just feeling it's just easy to listen to stories and not allow them to hit our hearts.
Yeah.
And I think live by faith or die is so radically expressed in Fiji, but that's a concept that could be applied in the United States.
Yeah.
And especially we're in a political season. And what happens if we applied that to the person that was on the other side of the aisle, the other political party? Live by faith or die, eternal souls before God, regardless of their political party. I just feel like that's so significant.
And maybe the death that would require of our own
sacrifice,
our own ego, our own opinions. I was thinking too, I was reminded of a couple of years ago when, the leadership mantle torch was passed to you and you stood up on a platform before our whole field and staff and partners, and you made the statement. I was reminded of it today, that our calling to be imperfect ministers of God's generous love. I don't even know if you remember that you said it, but I was stirred by that too, like the little section of just how we're not perfect, but we're called to receive and to minister God's generous love, and that brings transformation. So I'm right there with you, like, yeah, be excited about Fiji, but go into the world as an imperfect minister of Christ's generous love. So
Amen.
It's just stirring today, man.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm just as long as I get a shirt.
That's a loud clap.
Thank you for joining us today on the Redeeming Missions podcast. If you like what you heard, we encourage you to visit everyhome.org/redeeming missions to find all past episodes and learn more about supporting the efforts of Every Home to carry Christ to everyone, everywhere, in every generation. Echoing the prayer of St. Patrick, Christ with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us. Let us carry Christ to our world. Until next time.